Oh my goodness. Okay, folks, here we go. I think we is live. We is live, I tell you, we is live. So, um, I'm just gonna do some little chit-chatting as we make sure it's going to all these different platforms. But folks, if you are tuning into this, this is the Real Talk, a Real Walk um, live stream that we do once a month. This is our second, so we're still new. So be kind. Um, and we are here as part of the Eraser Institute, and we are focused this particular month on thinking through anti-Black racism and how it appears, in particular, in post-secondary education. Um, if you are watching this or joining us, you can always check out the Eraser Institute to see what we're doing there. There are membership options that you have. There's ways for you to engage. This particular month, we are looking at the film Ninth Floor, which is fantastic and very heartbreaking. I was just saying to my fancy special guest that I started to rewatch it just before. I got about midway through and I was like, oh, this isn't a good idea. I was ragey and crying and because it's heartbreaking to see what happens on our campuses. Um, so before I introduce my guests and before I jump into a deeper conversation, I want to make sure that we always start well. And for me, that's with a land acknowledgement. And so I am hosting this conversation from my home in Kitchener. This land has been held down, cared for, loved, and stewarded by the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Neutral people. We are on the Haldeman Tract. If you go to the Eraser Institute website, I'm just going to throw that web address up for anybody who is watching and interested in knowing what land they are on. On the homepage of the website, and actually in any of the pages on the right, there is a little link to know the land. You can literally press that and find out exactly what land you are on. And that is very, very important to know who has been stewarding and holding that land with love and care and compassion. But one of the things that I have been taught is that with a land acknowledgement, the work towards reconciliation is more than just recognizing the history of this land. It's actually trying to find a way to reconcile the realities of said history and the current realities that you're in. And so, what I have been taught is to make a concrete connection between the topic of conversation that I am about to engage in and the reality that I'm having that conversation on stolen land. And so, if I think about the concrete connection right now, and I consider the fact that we're going to talk about racism in the post secondary sector, my immediate connection, what I think I'm grappling with a lot, especially when I think about what happens in post secondary education here, is the fact that this institution that's supposed to represent wisdom and knowledge, the place that you're supposed to strive to be a part of, was created without thinking that Indigenous people belonged there. It was created on their land um, and in such a way that they were never allowed to be part of and meaningfully a part of. And that history, the creation of our post secondary sector, carries on today. When you look at employment equity reports from post secondary sector, when you look at demographic reports in the post secondary sector, you see that there is a gap when it comes to who are in positions of leadership, how many Indigenous community members are in positions of leadership within these institutions, who's in what program when it comes to the student demographics, how many Indigenous students are taking part in these programs. And there's this weird myth that Indigenous communities aren't taking part because of lack, like something that they lack, as opposed to recognizing that these institutions were established in such a way that they were not meant to be part of them. Um, when I think about the fact that we're going to be speaking specifically this particular month in June, we're focused on anti-Black racism and how that appears in the post-secondary sector. There is such a concrete parallel because these institutions weren't made with Black folks in mind either. And so a lot of the experience that Indigenous students and faculty and staff have in our post-secondary sector is a parallel experience with Black students. And while we try to find ways to gather, there are Indigenous student centers and there are Black student associations that do exist on some campuses. How those groups are treated compared to how other groups are treated is very different. And we often don't talk about that. Who gets funding and where that funding comes from? Who's provided with space and who's not provided with space, what happens in those spaces, how policed are those spaces, does security pass by the spaces or the events for those particular student groups and staff and faculty groups, or do they not? All of those kinds of questions that are uncomfortable questions to ask are questions that Indigenous students and Black students are often having no choice but to ask themselves. And it makes them wonder about whether or not it is worth being part or staying connected to our post-secondary sector. That in and of itself is something that we need to speak of. And so with that as my starting point, today I have asked Marjorie and Melissa to join me in a conversation about the ninth floor. And more broadly, like we don't have to go into I'm now speaking. Everybody who's watching, close your ears, as my mummy says, because now I'm just talking to Melissa and Marjorie. Just give me a moment. But we don't have to go into great detail about like this was said here and about ninth floor, but we can use that as a starting point for us to start thinking through three big steps that I think we need if we're going to be anti-racist in this world. The first step, and you folks that are listening are going to hear me say this repeatedly, the first step is understanding our social context. The social context is always shifting. What is happening in the world, the broader world around us, does influence the way that racism appears in a particular space. So understanding the social context is the first piece. The second is recognizing your sphere of influence. There are assumptions made about who you have access to and what that access can do to become anti-racist, to do anti-racist work. And there's also, interestingly enough, when we are talking about race, there's assumptions about who even has a sphere of influence, right? Like we make this assumption that some people have privilege and some people don't, that some people have power and some people don't, that some people have influence and some people don't. But depending on what's happening in a particular context and depending on what it is that you're trying to achieve when you're building your anti-racist project, your sphere of influence may be there and is there, in my humble opinion. It's just you haven't necessarily looked at it yet. And I think that that's why these conversations are so important for us to get some examples of what it looks like when you start to think about around you and how they can also be helpful in the broader movement. And then the third step, which is the best step, is actually mobilizing your privilege, doing something. Enough theory, let's get to action. And so with that, hello, my fantabulous, wonderful friends. Hey, Melissa, how you doing?
Hi, Laura May. I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing wonderfully well. For those that thought I was a true professional, I just want you to know that Melissa sent me an email and was like, I press a button on the website and it doesn't seem to be connected to anything. And I'm like, yeah, that's because I forgot to connect it to stuff. That's okay though, because we all make some errors. And by the way, Melissa, do you want to jump on this live stream with me? And she said yes. Oh my goodness, it was very, very funny. And so, oh my goodness, I forgot to say, for those that are putting comments in, like if you're following on LinkedIn, I can see them. Yay! Hello, hello, hello. And then Marjorie is with us as well. Marjorie, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. This is a really timely topic.
This is a timely topic, and I don't think that Marjorie wanted me to do this, but I cannot help but do it.
Uh-oh.
Marjorie. Uh-oh, did you see the face I just got? Oh, I just got a face. It makes me rethink what I was about to say, except I'm just going to hum something. We're just going to take a moment, pause. I'm just going to hum something that has something to do with something that happened yesterday, and let's see what happens.
Really, Melissa, you're taking part in
You're lucky we didn't bust out in the Stevie Wonder
Listen.
version, because that's the thing.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. So listen, I just want to say, Marjorie, that I love you for no particular reason, and that yesterday was a very important day in the history of Marjorie-ness. And
Yeah,
so
old.
there you go. No, thank you, Joy. Joy guessed it. I think that's
Yes.
hilarious. Okay, so now Marjorie is with me, and you folks, if you logged in last month, you would have seen me chatting with Marjorie as well. At that point, we were focused on Indigenous sovereignty. I just need to stick a pin for any of the new people that are joining along. Part of why we're focused on different themes every month is because there seems to be a myth that racism is like one size fits all. It's the same for everybody. It looks the same for everybody, and it's not. And so what I wanted us to do was to sort of explore what it looks like for different groups in different sectors and all of that kind of stuff. And so this particular month, Ninth Floor is the film that we were engaging with. You can find that on NFB. And again, if you go to the website or even to my Mighty Network, you will be able to find it there. Just look up Eraser Institute and it's all available. So I say let's let the games begin. So the very first context is that first step, understanding the social context. So what kind of work, I'm going to ask, why don't we start with you, Melissa?
Sure.
What kind of work do you do within the post-secondary sector? And with the work that you do in the, and like your connection to it broadly, it doesn't even matter. And how has the reality of ongoing anti-Black racism impacted the work? So what does that social context look like for you?
Mm-hmm. So I work within this counseling services at the University of Waterloo. So my role currently is acting director, permanently is associate director within counseling services. And so it looks like, us working really hard to increase representation within our services for Black students, hearing from Black students the impact that being on a post-secondary campus has on them. I think a lot of times, especially in the Black community, we don't talk about mental health. We don't talk about, going to counseling. We don't talk about, but our students are struggling. They're struggling with mental illness. They're struggling with suicidal ideation as a result of the impact of being on campus, as a result of feeling silenced and muted. And so my social context here as the director in counseling services is to hear from my staff what's happening and to start to make actions towards change within the post-secondary institution. I've only been here for 11 months. And I would say in that time, there's been a significant shift in kind of what counseling services look like here, but also mental health and health across in that time, just because my presence says something. The fact that I'm a Black woman in a senior leadership role on campus in this particular sector says something.
Yeah.
And so, I take that really seriously and want to make sure that I'm always kind of hearing what's going on and then getting to the action, which we'll talk about kind of later. But that's me. That's my social context.
That is fantastic. So thank you. Welcome.
Thank you.
11 months. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
I remember when I was working at Laurier, in 2016, when there was there were a lot of students that were from both of our campuses, like both UW and Laurier campuses, that were driving into Toronto to take part in the BLM action that was happening in downtown Toronto.
Yeah.
And I remember us fighting for mental health supports specific for Black students at the time.
Yeah.
And there being questions as to why that would be needed.
Mm-hmm.
And some of the questions were sincere. I want to be very clear about that. Like, there was just, why would they need something different? And what I realized was that there was such a disconnect between, for people that were in positions of leadership, in understanding that the experience of racism, especially the subtle racism, has an impact on you that's carried with you. And if I think about even at the very beginning of the 9th floor. Like, these are folks that are talking about something that happened to them when they were in their 20s.
Yeah.
And they are tearing up and
Yeah.
they are holding it still. They are still carrying that pain.
Yeah.
So the reality of the need for that mental health support is real. So anyway, I'm throwing that out there. Marjorie, you jump in. Talk to me about the social context here.
Let me tell you what happened the other day.
Bring it.
In conjunction with Porchlight, Rhythm and Blues Cambridge, which is my little grassroots operation, we did a session on mental health for Black women. Oh my gosh. It was really amazing what came out of that. And I'm still processing and putting it together and to figure out next steps, because there has to be a next step.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that really came up in there was the fact that when we're dealing with our kids, we're like, education, 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 and you're pushing them and you're pushing them. And mental health, listen, man, just buck up, man.
Yep.
Just suck it up and go on.
Yeah.
And so there's an entire culture situation where we just hide away from mental health.
Mm-hmm.
And if something is going on, you're trying telling them to, get over it. And if they can't get over it and things get bad, you just kind of pretend it's not there.
Yeah.
But I can tell you that if I have Black families that need therapy, in our region, there are so few therapists, psychotherapists, anybody of color, that they've all gone private and their lists are through the roof. You can't get it.
Yeah.
So I'm in a position where I'm sending my families to Toronto to get help from culturally responsive therapy, because the culture is important. I'm sorry, but if I'm talking to the average white person, they don't understand where I'm coming from, my culture. So I have to explain my culture. Listen to their going, oh my gosh, is that how it is? Before you can even get to the point of talking about what the problem is. So we are sending our kids off to universities and colleges without any tools to deal with these things. They're not getting it at home. They don't get it through high school anyway. They're not getting it from community because it almost doesn't exist. So by the time they get there and the stress of that hits, that's another story. But I still maintain that going to look at the post-secondary thing, you have to start from before. Because how many of us are really getting to post-secondary?
Well, this is a whole other thing.
So that you have to now discover each other when you get there.
Yeah.
Small populations, it's very hard. It's maybe one in your class who looks like you. So, how do you go across this humongous campus to find each other? So, it's really difficult. And I actually spend a lot of my time intentionally working with youngsters from the age of 12 and 13 to get them to believe they can do post-secondary. And to get them to make a plan of how to get to post-secondary. What kind of courses to do, what kind of volunteering to do, what kind of extracurriculars to do, all these things to get them there, but to also support them and bringing them into a culture of mental health is being looked after, well-being is looked after, support is there, support is around you to get you there. And until we deal with getting the wave going, we're having a hard time with our youngsters in college or university because they didn't have that.
Yeah.
And so now what do we do?
Well, and that also raises another thing that I find so striking, because I've watched Ninth Floor a number of times, but another thing that I found so striking is that it starts explaining that the university went on a recruitment mission. This was in 69 in Quebec, for those that haven't seen the film. And oftentimes that's what happens. We have a gap in a representation, whether it's with the students or the faculty or the staff, and we decide we're going to actively recruit. So we actively recruit a bunch of people for whom the system was not made, bring them in. These were students that were going to become doctors. They encounter streaming in a very similar way to what we speak about with streaming in high school, where you're streamed out of the path. So they were failing, oddly enough. This small group of Black students would every year fail a required course to get them into the next step of their path towards medicine. And that those students at one point stand up. So that's the whole starting point. I raise that though, because for both of you, as you're talking about this social context, the go-to is we need to get more people in. Our go-to for action items is to get younger students to feel like this is a path they can take. And yet we also are holding the reality that once they get there, this system may not be, in the words of Beyonce, ready for this jelly.
That's
right?
The supports that we need to build around our students, the recognition of the stresses, the recognition that it's not enough to just say, oh, okay, you need to get these grades so you can go and do that. But the whole wider, workarounds, the support that is encompassing everybody, that if you have a problem, you have somebody to talk to. If you need something to work through it, this is here. This is how you get tutoring. This is how you get therapy. This is how you get, this is how you meet up with others with similar things, so that as a group you can work together and work and through things. But we don't have those supports set up along the line. We actually don't. It's a fight to get through high school. It's a fight to get into college and university. It's a fight. And when you get there and you look around, it's just you.
Yeah.
Until you begin to find other people. But that's also a difficult thing, to find other people. So,
and Melissa, before we move from that point that Marjorie is making, and again, if I'm putting you on the spot, you can just say pass. Or what else could we say?
No.
Oh yes.
No.
But I'm curious. I have my own feels about this. But again, you're a Black woman in this senior level position doing mental health work, with this focus. You're aware of what's going on, etc. It reminds me again of the 2 Black teachers that were put on the committee in Ninth Floor. So sometimes then we get put into these positions where we now are holding the needs of the institution, because that's your gig, and the needs of the community. Can you speak a little bit about how that is part of the context in which you are working? Because you've shared with us like your professional space and what that does.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit more about that for me.
So balancing the two, I'm in the role and I'm here as a representative of the university, and this is how our students are experiencing post-secondary education. I think for me, I do that from a place of just my values, and I try not to get caught up in the worry, concern so much about like what's the right thing to say or do for my job, but more if I've been put in this position. It was, this position was recruited to have somebody who was racialized in it for a reason, right? So I try to walk into those spaces knowing that, and saying like, I've been here because you need my voice, you need my perspective. It's not the time now for me not to speak up about what's happening and what the changes need to be. And so I really make the changes known, the ideas that I have known that would be helpful for students. And just kind of carry myself in that space. I you're always thinking about, this is a big system. It's a hard system to change. However, where can we make shifts within the sphere of influence that we have? Like, where can I actually make shifts? And then bring those tangible actions to the table and clear directions on how we can make them happen. I can give you an example. So we have a position here for, it's called a counselor specializing in Black student support. And it's a position that's been vacant since I started here, and we haven't been able to fill. But in that process of trying to get it filled, recognize that we did not have the proper system set up for support for these specialized counselor roles. And so then what I've done is created a management position specifically to support counselors whose role it is to support equity deserving groups, recognizing that they have a lived experience that's coming to work with them every day. The stories the students bring to them impacts them. And so they need a manager or support person in a leadership role who can hold that and understand that and then bring that to me so that I can then adjust and make suggestions for change within the system. So that's kind of how I navigate the space, by coming with clear, tangible actions that we can take and shifts that we can make. And part of the role for the counselors is to go out and engage students in the community, on campus. So what Marjorie's talking about, how we're not talking about this at home. No one's preparing us for what mental health is. No one's preparing us. Knowing that students are coming to campus and they have no idea that what they're experiencing is actually depression, or what they're experiencing might actually be supported by coming to counseling. So the idea is to get out into the community and start talking with students in the spaces where they feel safe, right? So that we can eventually connect them in to counseling. And one of the big shifts that we're trying to work on right now is to provide different ways of mental health service that's not traditional talk therapy, counseling, because that may not be the most culturally responsive way that our students, what they need, right? So making these small bite-sized changes, but having, a significant impact, I think, within the service.
I am loving this. And you know why I'm loving this? Because I'm so tired of seeing in our community, oh my God, look, man, we got an equity person. We hired an equity person. Listen, an equity person who cannot make decisions, cannot make change. And they're like turnover every 5 minutes to somebody new. Because it's like, look, man, we've got an equity person. We've done our part. But you're not in a position to make change, to be able to actually be on the decision-making table to make change, and it's a waste of time. Kudos to University of Waterloo for putting you in a position where you can actually make the change. And I'm sure that it's very representative of what others should be doing.
Yeah.
I work with another university, and part of what I do is I look at their incoming students and put a racialized lens on things as to there's more than grades, why you need to accept people into your program. What do they bring to your program? What do they do? And so it's opening a door a little wider so that others can come in, and I enjoy doing that too. But I am thrilled to see somebody like you, Melissa, doing what you're doing. It is going to pay off, and it's going to make a lot of difference in people's lives.
Thank you. I hope so.
And what I'm also hearing is that so we go into these roles and you are often the only person tasked with doing this, because an institution has to start somewhere, so they hire the first person to do the thing, right? But it sounds to me like what you're also doing is you're creating a social, like a social network, a network for the future employees, so that those folks that you now hire, even though it's vacant now, the people that get into that role will become part of their sphere of influence,
Mm-hmm.
which is so fascinating to me because it's coming from the other direction. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's like this idea that there was an idea once upon a time in the establishment that what we were going to do was just hire the one person, and that was going to solve the problem.
Yeah.
We were going to hire, and we see that often, one person, maybe two, right?
Yeah.
And they're so busy and so overwhelmed that that turnover that Marjorie's talking about happens.
Yeah.
But now you've created, slowly but surely, a network of people so that they do have that system of support. I think that's fantastic.
Yeah,
Mhm.
because we're all not the same, and we're all not coming from the same places and the same, cultures. I mean, I came up to university in Canada, from Jamaica, where my high school was a couple hundred people, to a university. It was like mind blowing up. You forget that they don't have my food, they don't have my music, they don't have my culture, they don't understand me. And what did you say? And
Yeah.
all of that, and the lack of expectations that your professors have for you because they expect you to fail.
Mm-hmm.
It's a different experience from someone who grew up in Ontario and went to school and did everything there and then move on to university. It's a completely different experience, different expectations, different stressors. So, it can't be a one size fit all experience. So
No.
it's not
So I'm gonna ask you the next question, Marjorie, and then we'll come back to you as well, Melissa. But you had mentioned that you were doing some work to sort of help with the way that the folks are looking at the applications to get into a particular program, right? So what do those credentials look like? I have to, for those that don't know a lot about how these systems operate, that's one of the main ways to keep us out, right? Because your K to 12 education system is already working to push Black students out of that stream. They're also pushing Indigenous students out. They're pushing a lot of non-white students out. They're pushing a lot of newcomers out. And so by the time you have this fairly small, intimate pool of people that are applying to a university program, they've already experienced this kind of push out, which means in their battles to be present in K to 12, they haven't had a chance to volunteer as much, or they haven't had a chance to get into some of those specialized programs that might give them an additional certificate that they'd be able to then add to their CV and their application, because they've been busy fighting the realities of a racist system that they are a part of. So there's a lot of talk about what we can do in that particular space when it comes to the review of the applications as they come forward. So the second question is to sort of explore through your sphere of influence. You talked about the context, your sphere of influence, and what you can do in that space. So Marjorie, given the kind of role that you are playing in that sort of training people in that area or opening their eyes and expanding their understanding of that area, what does your sphere of influence then look like? Talk to me a little bit about that.
So what it really does is that it ends up with a group of people coming together to look at applicants. So everybody has their own list of applicants that they're looking at and that they are evaluating. And then they come together to talk about who, for the whole group of names, should really go through, and who could go through with support, and who should just plain go through because wow. And what I find is that, yes, you have to have a certain grade level at the end of the day, because if you're going to pursue this, you have to be able to manage it. But also realizing that just because you are not writing particularly well, does it, but you can see the brilliance because in your whatever the K-12, you weren't taught that properly. There are so many supports in university around this kind of thing. So I can take you and I can make sure that you have these supports to help you get to where you need to be in that one thing, because that's the only one thing that's really stopping you from excelling. So I look at somebody whose life experience is big. It may not be a formalized training. It may not be that you worked here or you whatever, but you may, because of something in your family or your community, have worked in community and with people close to you to deal with certain things. So your perspective on how to deal with things is often so out of the box that you're like, wow, I wouldn't even have thought of that. So I'm finding that with Indigenous students. I'm finding that with racialized students. I'm finding that with some students from other countries, from other provinces. And it's amazing. They might be overlooked. They weren't the perfect, didn't hit every box. But as I said, you look at them and you realize, hey, what this person would bring to this program would be amazing. People would not normally have come into contact with people like this, with perspectives like this, with understanding of ways of life like this. And as our influence sphere gets bigger and bigger, because we have people moving into our area all the time, people from different experiences, people coming from war-torn countries, people coming from anywhere you can think of. And, if we want to grow as a community and really connect everybody, then we need people who can actually identify with things like that. Yeah. People who can make our world bigger in the way we look at things, our worldview, make it different, make it change the way we do things. So whereas you in the past probably excluded people like that because you were on a narrow trajectory, this is who we want, this is what we expect, and this is it. Now it's kind of opened up and we're looking at other things, and you realize that everybody after a while starts looking at like from that kind of a perspective, not just looking for the narrow, but looking for growth.
Marjorie, how did you start doing that kind of like playing that kind of role? And was that like, how did that happen? Like straight up.
Okay. No,
I don't know.
I sometimes guest lecture for professors. Usually, on my thing of activism or poverty or that kind of thing. And so I guess from doing that and meeting people, they said, oh, maybe you might be a good person. And I thoroughly enjoy doing
that. That is very, very interesting to me, because I think, again, sometimes the kinds of questions and concerns that come to me around how to put the theory into practice, right? Like that's where I'm kind of obsessed with this idea of moving from theory to practice. One of the questions and concerns is like getting into the right place. And I think that that's part of why the dialogue of I don't know anybody that can fix this problem, then you feel overwhelmed, like that's where it happens. But the reason I wanted you to sort of share that is because sometimes you're just speaking, you're doing one thing and the universe around you is doing something else. So you're at this lecture speaking about whatever, but you may not have realized that there was somebody else who was in that room who actually oversees those applications coming in, sees value in how it is that you're presenting your understanding of different lived realities, and they call you in. So your sphere of influence all of a sudden grows. Like I think that that's really important for people to take a moment and sit with, because it's not always the straightforward trajectory that gets you into a place where you can start doing the work that, for instance, Melissa's doing. So Melissa, same question to you. How did you navigate into this particular role?
Exactly what you're describing. It was my desire to kind of be in a director level position, and then this position just kind of appeared to me, and I read the role and I was like, oh, this sounds like me. And so, when I got into it, didn't realize kind of the level of work I would be doing around trying to address the anti-racism pieces in this space in particular. I was just coming in here to do a good job as an associate director. And then, things are put in front of you and you are called to make these changes and to make these shifts. And so I'm grateful that the university has moved in this direction to address anti-racism on campus. And so we have a whole unit now, an anti-racism unit. And so I connect with them and their director frequently to talk about what's happening with not just Black students, but our Indigenous students, many of our equity deserving students. And then I connect, I think because my role has historically, my profession has been community, right? Yeah. I spent a little bit of time at Laurier, but for the most part, I'm community mental health. So my brain thinks community, it thinks collaboration, it thinks I don't have to do this all by myself. So I not only consult and connect with my internal network here, but externally. So I'll reach out to external directors who I know are doing some of this work and saying to them, like, what am I missing? What could I be doing differently? And asking those questions. I also reach out to trainers who are in the community who are doing this work around anti-racism education. And I've been bringing them in to train us as a leadership team and our staff, because they have influence over who comes up into our service, right?
Absolutely.
So I really try to stick to like the many hands make light work and connect my network as much as I can, which is why I love what you're doing here, Laura May, with Eraser. Because it creates a network. It gets you to figure out like who's out there that I need to talk to. Like Miss Joy Harris, who's on this call right now.
Oh yeah.
We keep connecting through social media, but I've never actually met here on campus, right? So like those are things where I'm like, okay, who else can I be speaking with to help make these changes? Who else is somebody that we need to be kind of working collaboratively together? So the universe put me in this place. I fully and completely believe that it was handed down to me and said, this is yours to take care of. And I feel fulfilled being in the role, because these are hard positions to be in, right? To be a woman of color in a senior leadership position, where someone described it to me the other day, like you walk on a really tight rope. Like there are sharks on the bottom of the water and you could tip one way or the other any moment. And so it's a hard position to be in. And I think if I didn't feel called to it and I didn't feel that it was the right space for me, that it would be an overwhelming and uncomfortable, exhausting role to be in. But it doesn't feel like that. It feels like I'm supposed to be here and bring all these connections together, connect all these dots in order to make change.
Yeah. So thank you for that. And that leads rather nicely into the last thing that I like people to think about, this notion of privilege. I think we get taught about privilege in a particular way, especially in today's context. There's a lot of discussions around who has privilege and who does not. And there, I think, underlying it, a lot of assumptions about what privilege looks like, who has access to it, and as a consequence of that, who can actually do things. And I'm a big believer that we actually all have privilege, that it's a bit misleading to believe that only some people have privilege. I think we all do. The question is trying to figure out where it is, which is what I often tie to your sphere of influence. Pay attention to who's around you, because that always shifts. And then your privilege kind of can come from that if we choose to move. And so I'm wondering if we can take a second before we wrap up our conversation to think about this idea of privilege. In the work that you're doing, with you, Melissa, first, with the work that you're doing on campus, and even with the community mental health work that you do, what does that privilege look like, and how different, if maybe I'm wrong, like maybe my idea about this sort of assumed privilege is incorrect, I don't know. How different does it look? So what does that privilege look like for you that allows you to be able to do the change work that you want to do? And how different is it perhaps from what other people sort of assume privilege to look like?
Mm-hmm. Okay, let me see if I can keep my thoughts straight. My privilege currently is the position that I sit in right now,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, I don't know that I am any different than others someone else who could be in this role, right? So if you're in this role, you have the ears of people who can make big decisions. And so that's the privilege that I hold, that I'm in a senior level position, that I have the influence over who is hired, on the team and brought in to this team. I think in comparison to my community mental health work, I was in a management position. And so I had the privilege there of shifting what the direct service work looked like and how folks went out into the community and worked with people. But I didn't have the same level of privilege and influence from a systemic level, right?
Like that traditional power.
That's right. And so I have that in this role now.
Mm-hmm.
I also feel like in this role now, I have the ears of others outside of my sector. So I'm in the mental health sector, but I also have the attention of people in other parts of the university, right? And I think with this role comes a sense of part of the privilege comes the confidence. Like, I don't know that many people would just, reach out to you, Laura May, and be like, hey, your website's not hooked up there, sweetie, fix that so I can join your webinar. Right? But I have that confidence, I think, because of, I know you a little bit outside of this, also because of the position that I sit in. And I'm like, I need to be in this. I need to be a part of this discussion originally as a participant so I can learn more and then transfer that influence and that knowledge to others. So I agree with you when you say privilege is something that we all have. We all have privilege in different ways, right? Yeah. And we've recently talked at our management table, where we have white managers, and we talked about the privilege they have to speak for racialized people in spaces where we can't. Mm-hmm. Right, and to use that privilege to speak up in support of change where we might not be able to. So I think we all have privileges, and with this role, it's been an interesting adjustment for me to be in this senior of a level of position. With this role comes a lot of privilege, and I just want to always be honoring that.
Thank you for that. And I want folks that are listening, whether you're listening live or watching this later, to take some time. Like, doing anti-racist work takes time, right? Mm-hmm. So take some time to look at these two different types of privilege that we're speaking about before I hand it over to Marjorie. There's traditional privilege, which is what I think most people are accustomed to thinking about. And I think we're mostly accustomed to thinking about that one because it's easier for us to scapegoat ourselves out of doing the actual work, because not many people are in positions of power that have the decision-making abilities to be able to make the change in a snap. So it's easy when we think about that. Nobody wants to hear me say these words, but that's okay.
It's all good.
But it's easier for us to be able to say, well, I'm not a manager. So let's say in your organization, I just come here to work 9 to 5 or whatever. I'm not a manager. I can't change that. Oh, I'm not a this. I can't change that. When we say those things, we're only thinking about traditional power. But there is a non-traditional level of privilege that can actually be mobilized to make change too. I would argue that being Black in that role gives you a different kind of privilege when it comes to providing the supports to Black students, probably staff and faculty as well, because there's a level of trust that people will presume to have. Now, not everybody can be trusted, but that starting point, that's not a hurdle that one has to jump over right away.
Yeah.
You have to then, do the things to keep that trust, maintain that trust. But the reality is, I've seen a lot of, it's happened in a variety of departments in places I've worked where it's all white counselors, and people are like, well, can't we just do enough training that the same cohort of white counselors would be able to go and help the Black students on campus, or they would be able to go and help the Indigenous students on campus? Perhaps. Or you could get a Black counselor that would be able to do a multifaceted number of things. Like your mere presence lets people know that something different is happening here. It may also let people know that mental health is okay. It might be happening to a student that never says a word to you, but they start to say, oh, wait a second, then maybe, do you know what I mean? Your presence there makes a difference.
Yeah. Just seeing me now on screen, which is so funny. But when folks just see me on screen, sometimes you can just see the relief, where they're just like, oh, thank God. Right? And that immediately cuts across the barriers. Like the trust is almost instant. And of course you have to be mindful of that and right. But it's almost instant just because they're like, oh, okay, I know you get some things.
And so that can set in motion a whole other set of, it's like a whole other pathway opens up. And so the same question for you, Marjorie, when you think about what your privilege looks like and how different it might look, and sometimes it's in the intersections in our identity that does that as well. Like, anyway, my brain's all over the place, but Marjorie, over to you around, I could talk about this stuff forever. But my interest is in the action piece. And so what I love about these conversations that we're doing for the live stream is that I have an opportunity to talk to people about sort of like the background, the inner workings that have led to some of the change stuff that they're doing, which to me is fascinating. So Marjorie, to you, that notion of privilege, what does it look like, and how different, if different, does it look from what you think people outside might be seeing as privilege?
It's an interesting thing. I was a fairly quiet and desperate life, moving to Canada. And I guess it was my first time when I decided that I would actually speak out loud and publicly about some of the struggles that I had. And because everybody feels they're in a little silo.
Yeah.
Right. Well, they are. They don't know that there's anything else happening around them. They don't know that there's anybody else who has that kind of thing. And I think because I did that, it drew people to me. I don't know if I have something stamped on my forehead, but people always want to come and talk to me. I'll be sitting at a bus stop and people will just start talking to me.
Yeah.
So apparently I have something stamped on my forehead. But the more I spoke and the more I spoke up and the more I challenged people's perceptions of things, the more privilege I got, because then people would stop to listen to what I had to say, because they couldn't really put me in a box. They couldn't say, oh, this lazy, no good woman, no wonder she's homeless because, she doesn't work and she doesn't this, because I worked and I worked hard and I did this and I did things. So I didn't fit in a box. So what happened is that people would then listen to what I had to say, which then meant that people would then come to me to ask for help, whereas they wouldn't go to other people to ask for help. And it just kind of grew. So now, certain things are happening. I will just reach out to a person and go, excuse me, but why is this happening? And do you really want me to come there to talk to you about it? Or how are we going to work together to deal with this? So all of these things, I guess, have just developed into me doing other things and more things, which puts me in another sphere. So I, decided that we wanted to start up something with Rhythm and Blues Cambridge. That in itself has been exciting, which now has more people coming and opening up conversations around the mental health thing, or the education thing, or all these different things. So every step along the way, because I guess I am just so outspoken, people now listen. So when I will reach out on Twitter to say, listen, man, I have this little guy who needs to go to camp and I need $400.
Mm-hmm.
And people trust me enough to send me $400.
Mm-hmm.
Or, I have a case, this is going on, who can help? And people will say, oh, I can help. So it's almost like a mutual aid thing.
Yeah.
But people know that they can trust you, and you can reach out to people and people will respond. And so I think that most of my privilege comes from the fact that people know I am pretty much a straight shooter.
Mm-hmm.
That I'm not just going to say something because it sounds good. Because if it don't fly, don't fly.
Oh yeah.
But if it is, if it is something that I can help with, I will always help. If it is, if that I will always listen. I will help as much as I can. And then I'm not a player. I'm pretty straightforward. And I think that has allowed me to be able to move throughout the community and actually help things to get done.
Well, and that I think is an awesome place for us to sort of wrap up our conversation, knowing that we keep this conversation going in all these other spaces that we're creating, because it's also about courage. So once you've done the work to sort of get a sense of what's happening around you, and one of the questions that we had leading up to this conversation and for part of our grappling with these ideas in June, was like, how much has changed for Black students in '69 when the Sir William affair was happening?
My daddy was there then.
Are you serious?
Yep.
Wow.
That's very interesting, eh? And so you wonder sometimes, like, how much has actually changed? Because I often wonder that. I don't know how much has actually changed. But there's those kinds of questions, and you get a sense of what's happening in our context. And if you take the time to think about what hasn't actually changed, then that also lets you take a deep breath and recognize how heavy it is, the burden of racism and institutional racism existing right now on these students. And so there's that piece. Then you look at who's around you that you can talk to about trying to address some of this and be specific, right? In both of the examples that Melissa and Marjorie have given, there have been specific things that they were looking at, that they were trying to address. So for Melissa, specifically trying to help Black students who she's realizing and recognizing are experiencing racism in a particular way, or experiencing anti-Blackness in a particular way, and it's weighing on them, and that mental health crisis is real.
Mm-hmm.
And they may or may not even notice or be able to name it, which I think was the key problem that Melissa has raised. With Marjorie, it's this conversation about who gets in and who doesn't, and how are our experiences valued within the system to allow us to keep moving and better our lives. So you're specific in what it is, this problem that you're trying to address. Then you look around and see who's around you. And sometimes once you are specific with understanding what the issue is that you're trying to address, the universe intervenes, man, and puts you into the right place, where somebody then asks you to come in, or you are provided with this opportunity to start doing that kind of work. And then the big thing is to be courageous enough to mobilize your privilege, because the privilege you have, for Marjorie, even in that conversation about being trusting, like people just see you and talk to you, that becomes a privilege that you are able to mobilize. But you still have to be courageous enough to ask for help in the way that you need it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that I commend both of you for having the courage to go out there and mobilize your privilege in the ways that you have, I think it's so important, and it's making a difference in our little community here. And I've thrown into the chat, though I don't know if it actually goes anywhere, but through the Eraser Institute, once upon a time, I had said I will support. My goal is to support 100 anti-racist projects, big or small. I don't care. I'm going to support 100 anti-racist projects between now and next May, when I will be celebrating my birthday again, May 6th. Put it in your calendars. I like a good celebration. So at the end of the day, for me, it's like, if I just do 5 new projects every month and support people and network people, I am meeting my goals. And I met my goals in May, folks. Woo! And so here I am in June. And so I've thrown into this little chat for anybody who has an idea of something that they would like to try to address. And it doesn't have to just be in post-secondary, which is our focus today, but some kind of an anti-racist project that you think I can help you with, or the Eraser Institute can help you with. There are literally 100 people, I think it's 99 exactly, that are within this little network that we've created, which means there's a bunch of people who want to find a way to be part of the change. So I'm throwing a lot of gratitude out to anybody who has signed up. And if you haven't yet signed up, do sign up and be part of this little network of folks that are trying to make the change. Bring it.
Woo.
Woo, woo,
So,
woo, woo.
on the 1st of August,
Yes.
Emancipation Day,
Yes.
Laura May is coming to raise our flag on Emancipation Day. We're going to be in Cambridge because that's where I am. And we are shutting down the street in front of City Hall, and we're having a street party because we need to celebrate Emancipation Day.
Yes, we
These are
do.
one of the ways that we interrupt and we change things. We're going to have a history corner. You want to know about the history of Black people in this region? Come check out our history corner at Emancipation Day Street Party. Lots is going to be going on, and I invite you to come celebrate with us, because this is an important day in our culture. So I expect everybody.
I expect you to be there.
3 to 7. And if you can limbo, you could win a prize.
Woo! Listen,
I can only hold the pole.
Marjorie, send me information and I can share it out with people as well. So that if there's posters or any of that, you let me know. I will be sure to share that. And I'm going to add to Marjorie's announcement, because the countdown to Emancipation Day is awesome sauce. And all of August in Ontario is Emancipation Month, baby.
Yeah,
that's right.
The entire month. And so it is a historic moment for us to be able to celebrate it. Celebrate, learn, keep fighting. So bring me projects if you have any ideas. Get in touch with me if there's anything that you need. If you have questions, the goal for this month is for us to grapple with what does anti-Black racism look like, and using the context of post-secondary so that we can stay focused. By all means, reach out to me. You folks have been amazing. Thank you to everybody who's tuning in, whether live or after the fact. Super cool. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Marjorie. Have a good day. Goodbye.
Thank you, Laura May.
I have to remember which button to press. Oh, here it is. I just found the button. I play with too many pieces of technology, so sometimes I can't exit. Okay. Bye, everyone.
Bye.